is about us having a conversation. It's very relaxed, quite informal. Ask questions. We'll come back out to you as we go through the session. So welcome. So brief introduction, I'm Sam Burrows. I sit on the advisory panel of London tech leaders. I've been supporting for just over a year now, I think is about right. And I'm super passionate about obviously promoting women, and it's really important. And so being part of this, certainly the women's element and driver as part of London Tech Leaders is something I'm super passionate about. I've worked in technology for 30 years, so often I've been the single woman in a room, and I've also come from sport and advertising and broadcasting, which is then, when you're coming from those environments, you really are the only woman in the room. I'm currently at the Ellison Institute of Technology, delivering all their enterprise applications. And I'm actually soon to be leaving at the end of this month and joining the Commonwealth Games to work for Glasgow. It's my passion. I've done 3 Commonwealths and Olympics before, so I'm going to do my ikigai, as we say. So, what we really wanted to talk about today was to kind of start talking about quiet culture. And I think you alluded to it before, actually, when you were talking about, you have lots and lots of big corporate companies or big companies that talk about how amazing culture is and come and join us and we've got the best culture ever. And actually, once you're in, it's not really that. And it's not the benefits and it's not the pay. We talk about actually, that's a very loud culture. And I always see a really good culture is quiet culture. And that is really not just soft skills, but operational. So how do you show up? I think one of them was like walk the talk, talk the walk. How do you show up? How do you show up as a behavior, your behaviors as a leader? Be honest, be authentic, be transparent, take accountability. So we're going to talk about some of that, our experiences, how leaders can, build tool sets to work through that, so that hopefully you guys can walk away with some of those nuggets and take them away. So I will pass it down the line, and each of the teams panel can introduce themselves. So Mana.
Cool. Hi, I'm Manu. I'm into engineering as well, so following your footsteps, I guess. I'm head of engineering at ATG and Entertainment. I'm 3 days old in the company, so I don't know a lot of it. So if you're asking anything about entertainment, I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm working on the agency ticketing side of ATG, which is getting a new proposition into the market. So this is really going to be cool. I'm up for the challenge. Have spent all my life into engineering. By education, I'm into electrical engineering. My motivation to come into software engineering was my friends were working in AC rooms while I was in underground, sweating it out. So I'm like, nah, this is not good for my social presence. So I moved into software engineering. But the transferable skills still remain the same. Like you connect the dots, you work with people, you understand what's going wrong. The algorithms still remain the same. That's how my journey started. I love jumping domains. Problems really excite me. I started with Nokia and Wells Fargo, hated it. Sorry for that. And then health tech, I was with Gusto, which was into food, and I was in insurance, and now I'm into entertainment. So I love seeing how technology solves problems for different users, different solutions, and how actually the culture changes based upon how users see our product and how users use our product as well. So that's me. Hello, everyone.
Thanks. Lacey?
Hi everyone, I'm Lacey Firestone. I'm a managing partner at Kyndrl, and that role is all about managing the relationship with some of our biggest customers globally. So I support a client that is based here in the UK. You can hear from my voice, I do not have a lovely British accent. I'm not from here, but I've lived here for about 3 years and absolutely love it. Outside of my day job managing that customer relationship, I'm the executive sponsor for our Women's Kyndrl Inclusion Network here in the UK. And so we have these things called KINs globally, which I'm sure I'll talk about at some point, but there are these inclusion networks that anybody can join. So we actually have many men in our network as well. And we just convene every month in these community events. And they might be in person, they might be virtual. It's often to sort of help uplift and promote one another and make sure people are getting access to great opportunities. So I love that just as much, if not more. in my day job. But as part of my day job, I do lead a global team of people all around the world. So establishing a consistent culture was really, really important to me. And before this role, I don't know if folks are familiar with Kyndrl in the room, but we spun off 3 or 4 years ago from IBM. So we are a company that manages some of the world's mission critical technology. And when I was at IBM, I worked with retail customers in the US. When we spun off, I said, I really want to do something different for a little while. And I did a chief of staff role for our chief transformation officer. She was charged with building out Kyndrl's culture when we spun off. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But needless to say, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm excited to talk about it on the panel.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. Jo?
I'm just inspired by listening to the remainder of the panelists. This is going to be amazing. So I'm Jo, and I am the Director of Data and AI at Moonpig, which is the pink layer above here as well. But that's by accident. That's not intentional at all. In my current role, I look after data platform, data engineering, analytics engineering, digital analytics. I also have the machine learning and AI capability within the company as well as product analytics. Basically, all of the data that we have, how we use it to make the gifting experience for Moonpig's customers better, richer, how they can express love. So it's a very interesting time to be in e-commerce. It's a very interesting time as the landscape is evolving, as all of our skill sets are evolving, but also as the shape of those industries are changing as well. And I am super excited about it. This is my first e-com role, so my career is also squiggly. I was last in construction and utilities tech. I was doing site surveillance and natural language and video processing at the edge. Before that, I was in insurtech, defense tech as well. Anything that kind of fuses a rich abundance of largely very unstructured data with applications that make the world a slightly better, safer, more interesting place. And now I'm helping people express love through cards and flowers and gifting, which is amazing. Crucially, as a part of that, I've worked in 1 billion different organizations, not quite a billion, I'm not quite that old, but through different types. And I think culture is a real, when you're thinking about it and how you in a leadership position look at it, like, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think every single situation I've been in has been completely different. So I'm very interested to contribute from that experience and that very much that squiggly career angle, but also to understand like what the playbooks are and any cheat codes that I've maybe learned along the way.
Great. Right, now you've met the panel. Let's ask them some questions. Okay, so first up, how do you define an established culture within an organisation? Jo, thoughts?
Gosh, let's jump in. Let's jump in. It's a massive question, right? It's a huge one. I was trying to give like a very here's the answer, and I don't think, to what I said before, there is an answer. I think there are a couple of things, certainly when I've come into new positions and leadership positions within companies, that I'm trying to look at and evaluate. Like, one is what they paint on the walls, but one is kind of a gauge of the current culture. And you can sometimes ascertain that within like an interview process, and you can meet people in the team, but you don't really get a sense of what the current culture is until you've been in there and you've experienced it and you've talked to people and you've trodden the boards for a bit. So there's what the current culture is. But that assumes kind of a static culture. It assumes that culture is a thing and it's got a fixed kind of quality to it. And you walk into an organization and it has a specific culture. And I suppose most of the roles that I've come into and most of the roles that I've been very fortunate to be in leadership positions in are those of transformation. So it's kind of ones where it's either a scaling company, it's a company who wants to scale from Series A to Series B, or you're coming into an established company, but they're in an inflection point and you're here to drive a change, or you're in a really kind of, not naming names, old, sluggish company, and they're on a bit of like a transformation program because there's an existential threat there as well. And so part of my role in leadership is actually understanding how that culture does need to evolve and how you're going to take the team that you've got with all the good and bad characteristics of what the current culture is and how that needs to develop over time. So I think earlier in my career, I was very good at gauging kind of where this at. Maybe that's a bit of a spidey sense or something that you get, but actually understanding where the culture needs to develop to, where you want to improve it, or where you need to change it in order to drive the transformation that you need in your role is a really, really big one as well. And I think in every single different company that I've worked in a leadership role, the answers to those two questions have been very, very different. The current culture has been very different, and my mandate and kind of the requirements of how that shifts have been very different. So I think I would go into any new role that I was going to go into, I would go in with an understanding of kind of how are we going to approach this, and how are we, with the skill set that I've built up, going to transform this to what it needs to be.
Great, thanks. Lacey?
I suppose it is. I thought it was absorbing instead of thinking about what I was going to say. But I think I would answer that in two ways. One is what I saw and what I was part of when we spun off into an independent company. And as you can imagine, coming from a firm like IBM, there's a very strong 100-year culture that exists there. And there were good things about that we wanted to bring with us, but there were also things that we wanted to shed and do differently. So from the very first day, our CEO and chairman, Martin, he included culture in every single leadership team meeting that he has. So he set the tone from the very, very top with his team that was just as important as the business transformation topics and the growth of the firm. So that really sent a message to me and to everybody else that culture was paramount. But to your point, that's not enough. Just talking about it in meetings is not enough. So my boss at the time, Nell, who's our chief transformation officer, she sort of galvanized the whole C-suite to build out what we wanted to be our culture and to test that and co-create that of it with everybody in the company. So we actually had like hackathons to kind of co-create the culture we wanted. And I found that really powerful because they were actually asking, they cared about it as an executive leadership team, but they were also asking the bigger firm and all the employees. And I thought that was really powerful. And then once that culture was sort of decided and defined, they went a level deeper and they said, beyond the one pager, what are the actual behaviors that we want everybody to embody? And we have a little book, it's in my purse, but I should have brought it up with me. We have a little like handbook of leadership behaviors that we all wanted to follow. And while all of that material is fabulous, the most important thing is I actually saw those things start to manifest in people's behaviors. So in meetings and calls and customer events, you actually saw people show up that way. And that's the thing that made people feel like the Kyndrl way, which is our culture, is an actual culture, not just a thing in a book or on a PowerPoint slide. So that's how we did it. I found it really, really cool to be part of. The other way I'd answer that is I also learned from Nell that you define culture based on your day-to-day lived experience, which most times is with your direct manager and team. So if you're a manager or if you're part of a team, all of the things on the beautiful slides are important and interesting, but how you show up in all those day-to-day interactions, that's what actually creates culture. And when your team is at dinner at night, sitting around a dinner table with family, the things that you say about your boss or about your company, that's actually your culture. It's not the stuff on the page.
Yeah, great reflection. Hello?
So in the word cluster that we saw, I think there was the unseen. I mean, that's the hardest part of the culture. It's really difficult to actually put your finger on something and say, hey, like this, if done well, I would be happy with the culture in the company. That's the tricky part. And so it was easy for people to manipulate it to say like, hey, like let's have a few more ping pong tables, maybe let's throw a big summer party and people would be happy, yes, for the evening, and then the same things come back to again. I think like you said, for me, culture is like how we as a collective behave in a room, nevertheless who is in the room. Doesn't matter if your CEO is in the room or not, doesn't matter if your CTO is in the room or not. How do you as a leader represent the values that you believe in, and how do you ensure that everyone does that even when you're not in the room? When that happens, that culture builds. And I struggled for a lot of time to define like, okay, what are the top 3 things I would say like these would be like. How do you deal with crisis? How do people pull up each other's? As in, like, how much do they appreciate the work of others? And how much do people criticize when someone is not in the room? How do people, when something breaks, a huge incident happens? I mean, we had a PII leak in one of the companies, and you have to see how people came together to support each other, to say, like, this is not one person or one team who missed this thing. It's actually a system. The system led us to do it. How blameless your culture is. Like, if you start listing down what you value as a company and then work backwards to say what behaviors would support that. I always say, like, build the principles, build the guidelines, and manage the behavior. I call it behavioral debt. I'm sure people know tech debt. I'm like, how much are you tolerating? I mean, we all go away from the principles. I have a 5-year-old daughter. We have house rules, and she muddles around it to say, like, okay, how much can I deviate from it? We all do that. And sometimes the business pressure forces us to do that. But the deviated behavior can't be the default behavior. So at how many times do you tolerate and how much do you tolerate is what defines it. I would say, like, manage that. I mean, we all know, like, linters, we have code linters, right? And it's like they actually put you in the line to say, you cannot violate this coding standard. And sometimes you're like, fine, I'll push it. I think how we as leaders show up, we are the human linters of the culture. We cannot let some of the things, some of the non-negotiables to deviate. And that's how we reinforce the culture which are based upon the principles we set. But having said that, companies go through transition. So the principles have to evolve as a part of that. If I'm a startup, if I'm in a startup company, my core principle could be move fast, break things. Great. But maybe like 7 years, 10 years into the role, like now you have to make sure your product is reliable, is secure, and not just move fast. So based upon where you are in the journey, what sort of team, how big is the team, your principles keep shifting. It can't be like a built thing and it stays there. It has to be a living system that has to evolve as the business evolves, as the belief system evolves, as the people size evolves, and how probably you might have seen it, like CEO changes and suddenly the culture changes. Why? So it is like someone comes in with a belief system and they think like, oh, we now have to impose that system. No, the business has to drive the commercial culture, the engineering culture, the product culture, everything has to come together and align it. I mean, I had a great engineering culture in one of the companies, but the product culture was going opposite. They were like, let's move fast. And the engineering culture was like, let's build reliable systems. I'm like, okay, good, but which one are you? So all the time it was a conflict. It's like, we always have to build reliable systems. And they're like, we want to move fast. We can't have siloed, functional, culture built in different functions. I'm a culprit of that. I was an engineering leader who built engineering culture without involving product people. I'm sure we were at some point in our journey as well. So I learned it to say never. We always have to have aligned culture across the company. So that's how I think about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's a bit of whether you're building or you're inheriting. It's a slightly different nuance to how you look at that. I definitely think, though, through the theme of this is aligning on those cultures. And I think the lady at the back mentioned about good culture is really around that communication and how you kind of shape that with your teams. Interestingly, I've got a brand new team and I'm setting it up. And whilst it's in the wider culture and context of EIT, we've done it very much in actually, what is our manifesto? How do we show up for each other? And we spent a whole day. And it can't be a side of desk. Like, you actually have to set time aside to work with your teams, and management need to do this. And if they're not doing it, then, you know, it's a flag. It is kind of like, how do we want to create that psychological safety? You know, what does that look like for each other? How do we communicate? Do we make sure we've all got our cameras on? You know, like little things that then we all are going to model. It's not just the thing on the wall. Yes, we're going to put that on the wall, but it is then about just doing it every day. And it's my responsibility to then do that every day, to show up, to say it's hard sometimes, right, as well. And that's all about just building that, you know, high-performing team, but that sits in that culture where people feel they can thrive, right? Great. On to the next question. So tell us about a time where maybe culture's saved or broken a team. Mano, you first?
Yeah. Okay, so I have seen a brilliant team, amazing engineers, great product presence, were into this assumption of building a platform, a gold-plated platform as a product. And it took them 1 year to go into production to put the product into the user's hand. And the main cause was that why were they gold plating? It's not because engineers just believed that gold plating is the only way. The root cause of all that was there was never a time where they were given hardening time, like making the platform right for all the reasons non-functionals. And so over time, the behavior evolved if we oh no, if we don't do it now, we would never get to do it again and we have to live with the mess. So how culturally your actions actually define how engineers start behaving. If you ask for an estimate, they'll be like, oh, it takes 3 months. And when you go into the deep diving, they'll be like, oh, it's because if we don't do the event streaming now, we would never get to do it. We'll be stuck with the monolith. I think that sort of behaviors you need to be really careful about, and what are you building it. When it's saved, I think it's about how you help people grow. Sometimes we all probably were there, and someone did mention about the promotions and how many people would be put into positions where we don't know if you're ready or not. And how, as leaders, we give clarity to people on where the growth opportunities are and actually provide them. Don't just say you're lagging here, but provide opportunities, push them into that uncomfortable zone and give them the help. I've seen brilliant engineers stay back, even if their salary was low, just because they have supportive environment. People were supporting each other, giving those opportunities, and they do amazing things. And you'd be like looking back like 12 months into it, you'd have built an amazing engineering team just because or they trust that you would help them grow. I think pulling each other, providing opportunities, help them grow, be authentic about it when they're not ready. I think I was discussing with someone, if you're not ready, tell me, but also tell me how do I get ready in next time. Don't just tell me like, well, you're doing fine, but we'll probably not your time yet. Tell me, how do I get there? So being that person really, I saw that make a huge difference in the culture.
Great, thanks. Lacey, any thoughts?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, I didn't think of a specific moment. I kind of thought about like a collection of moments, because when you're managing these mission critical systems for really, really large global firms, you have moments that test your culture every day, every hour. So we have priority 1, severity 1 incidents with the client, a lot less than when I first started on the account, thankfully. But those moments definitely test our team culture. And similarly, financial challenges, right? If you're running a large global P&L, profit and loss statement, you're managing the financials of your client, and it's basically like running a business inside the bigger business. And I think every day we get into these moments where either the numbers aren't what we hoped they would be, or we have a severity 1 incident, or there's some flavor of an intense issue. And the way our team comes together, at least the way I perceive how we come together, is we huddle, we stare at the problem until we understand it, but we don't stare at it so long that we get weighted down and bogged down in the problem. And to be able to kind of put the problem to the side, admire it, and then figure out very quickly how we shift into fixing it. My team is absolutely phenomenal at that, and we can only do that because we really deeply trust one another. And so in all of those moments, there is sometimes the inkling in my head as a leader to say, that is not what I wanted. Like, that's not what I wanted to hear. You feel your blood pressure rise, you get physical signs of anger, and then you're like, that's not productive, right? And you sort of take a moment and you take a deep breath and you think about, what if I were on the other side, what does my team need to hear from me right now? And I try to offer that up. It's not perfect. I definitely have moments where I slip, but I think those little micro moments that happen every single day and how you show up as a leader, as a teammate in those moments are just as important as those really, really big moments and how you show up then.
Great, thanks. Chair?
Wow. That's awesome. It's a very challenging question. I think I'm referring to my age quite a lot. I don't actually think I'm that old, but I feel quite old. In the progression from like becoming a manager and then having a leadership position and then becoming a manager of managers, and kind of understanding how kind of organizational dynamics work. I think there's something that is very innate to a lot of us. I don't know if it's particularly a female trait, but there's something that's innately very similar across a lot of the different organizations that I've worked in, that can really break kind of culture, where culture can become really, really problematic. And one of the things that I see that I think is a very natural instinct when you're dealing with transformational ambiguity is to envelop your team in kind of like a protective environment. And it's to say, actually, I really care about these people. I really care that they feel valued. I really care that they have clarity, that they understand that their work, that they can do their best work, and that they feel they can be transparent and open and honest at work. And in order to do that, I'm going to envelop them in my big organizational arms, and my team is going to be protected. And I think earlier in my career, that was a very natural instinct for me. Like, I'm a shield, I'm a human shield. You do it with prioritization and things as well, but culturally also, if there's ambiguity that rests outside, you may have a propensity to do this. When you become a manager of managers, you can see that behavior in your manager groups as well. And if you have a very diverse team, I do have a very diverse team from a lot of different disciplines as well. And each of those teams behave differently. They have different remits, they have different skill sets as well. It's very easy to draw these lines around these teams. And it is protective. And sometimes culturally, you can see this in ENPS surveys as well, where a particular team scores very, very highly, but they score very low on company culture and kind of company values. It's almost like that's a protective mode. And as a leader looking at that, it's very interesting to kind of see how you might work from that as well. And one of the things I think it was called out incredibly early is like clarity, and it's kind of making sure that you're doing everything you can within that environment to wrestle with that ambiguity, and not by trying to ignore it or kind of, pretending it doesn't exist, but actually to let people into some of that context so that they're understanding the mechanics of what's happening. So we don't establish this us and them attitude, or there's something how we operate, which is great, but actually there's an other side of this that doesn't operate so greatly. So one of the things that I've really kind of been focusing on, particularly within my own leadership, in the last kind of 12 months, has been really that authenticity and that kind of transparency and that openness with teams to be able to say, here is, we're going to actually face the ambiguity in the face. We're going to face some of the things that are challenging culturally and inside and outside of the organization of our team. And we're going to actually look that straight in the face, and we're going to face it head on, possibly using some of the skills and tricks that kind of you have established as well, but where you don't control the whole landscape, how you do that. And I think one of the big unlocks for that has been just very intentional, authentic communication, and making sure that my managers and even some of their managers and the wider teams understand kind of what's going on and how we collectively can operate as a team within a wider organization.
Great, thanks. I've got so many, so I won't call them out. But certainly when I've seen a leadership team break because of a culture, was a brand new leadership team coming in at SLT level, under a CIO, and we were asked to be quite honest in some feedback. And two of us who'd come from probably a better culture had been very honest with our feedback, with each other and to the CFO as well. So much so the CIO went, and then the new CDO came in and then basically swept everybody out. Because of the conversations that we'd had when we'd been honest with the CFO. So yeah, it was a lesson learned of gauging the psychological safety part of it, where we thought that was there, but it wasn't quite there, and it wasn't backed up to the point where one of my team members said, and I kid you not, I could have stabbed you in the back today, but I didn't. So that is from SLT, VP levels of a team. And that was where the culture where everyone was out for themselves and there was a sphere culture. And I think, that really broke the team. It swept all the brand new VPs out because it was also partly they weren't ready for the change. And I think that was actually very obvious as time was going on. But yeah, I mean, we talk about toxic culture. I had names. Who that was, Chatham's Rule and everything else. Yeah, but I think we've all got war wounds from some of these, especially very large enterprise corporate level. It's one of the things that I hold very dear now is how to really make sure that I create that psychological safety, even if it's just for my team, and I shield them from everything else so that at least they can work. And yes, it's not always great doing that, but at least they can operate and work. And my role is to kind of shovel, shield and shout for them. So
that is a really important, like asking for honest feedback actually creates that safety. I have worked, it probably comes in multiple places, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we have a visionary who thinks, oh, I need to go there, doesn't understand the engine room realities.
Yeah, you only get better if you get feedback, right? As a high-performing athlete, that's my background as well. The only way you get better is to get feedback, is to get coaching, is understand where you're working well. But actually, the bit that you really flourish is when you get that feedback, when you're like, yeah, maybe you could have done it like that. If you take feedback, you'll flourish. If you don't, and knock it down. And if you do some kind of, inward looking, and I've done many of that, soul searching, that's how you then move forward and that's how you unlock yourselves. That's certainly how you support the team. So this is not high performing teams chat, this is culture. Let's move on. Right, on that then, and we've all alluded to this, and I think a lot of people in the room have also, I think culture is very fragile, right? We've seen it break. It can break at scale, it's small. So what tool sets does a leader need to manage the varying disruptors within an organization?
Who goes first?
Who would like to go first?
You go first.
I'm happy to.
Lacey?
So tools can mean a few different things, right?
Yeah.
So when I thought about this, when you were building our culture at Kyndrl, we thought about tools in a broad sense across behaviors, symbols, and systems. And we had a great partner that worked with us on that thinking. And the behaviors were what I described earlier. So the documentation of how do we want to behave with one another and even with our customers and clients. The symbols were all about what do you do, what do you value, and how do you show what you value. So the examples here were things like who do you promote, who do you not tolerate, what kind of behaviors do you not tolerate, how do you spend company resources, whether they be time, money, etc. All of those things, all of those actions are symbols of what you value as a culture. And then systems like tools, it's not just systems in the traditional sense, but it's how you performance manage all of your processes. Like we say, our culture is all about being restless, empathetic, devoted, and the way we work is flat, fast, and focused. And when we spun off, our processes were not. There's a couple of Kyndrl people in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did not perceive them to be flat, fast, or focused. And so we had a lot of work to do to unwind a lot of those processes from our heritage firm and sort of rebuild them. But it was really important that we did that because otherwise all the nice words, when people got into an approval process or they were trying to get a price released or they were trying to get an engineering document approved, they would have run into all of these different blockers they had to go through. So those systems were really important. But unless you have all three kind of tools at your disposal and you know how you're going to approach all three of those elements, you get some of the stories that we've heard in the room where the culture begins to fall apart. The as-lived culture is not the on-paper culture. So it's behaviors, systems, and symbols. They all sort of come together in your toolkit to create that strong culture.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. Joe?
How can you add to that? I think that's incredible.
I think what you do is put the mic.
I need to bring her everywhere.
I think the hype girl on the side. I think I'm going to use a specific example because I just think it's important to share kind of like a learning experience that I've had, right? And I think one of the things to recognize is coming into a leadership role, succession of leadership roles, is that you're always learning and you're always adapting and you're always dealing with different companies and different people. And one of the most enlightening things I learned was actually from one of my now direct reports. And I have to shout out to my team because I have a huge gender diversity in my team, which I'm very, very proud about. And my current two direct reports are both women as well. But one of my direct reports, she is fantastic. And one of the things that she values very, very highly, in fact, we had an internal working group here for feedback and recognition. And she's a big champion of that. And she's a big champion of kind of understanding what that means from a personal perspective as well. And I think I came into this role with a very basic understanding of what that looks like from a systems approach and kind of from how you'd apply that to a larger team, and particularly a larger team that has a diverse set of skill sets as well. And I want to say a diverse set of different personality characteristics. There's a lot of neurodiversity in my team, obviously, as well. And how that applies across the team as well. And one of the things that she has really taught me is kind of that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And that probably applies to culture, but it certainly applies to feedback and recognition. But that we have to continuously work on the ceremonies and the processes and the environment that we have to ensure that the current team that we have and the team that we want to be and the team that we want to build has that facility to be rewarded. And I think probably, if I'm being very honest, I looked at some of the investment that was made in that space and I couldn't completely immediately see the value. And I think, to your point, kind of maybe not P1s, but kind of when you face into challenging environments and your culture is tested and you're really starting to see what happens when, the lights are off or when that comes into test, that actually it is those systems, it's those processes, it's those reminders of what brings us together as a team, and culturally what's important about, particularly in that space, in the feedback and recognition space, that are the things that hold up and make a big difference. And I would say in any future job that I have, that learning and that experience and kind of her real passion for that is going to come definitely with me into whatever role I have next. I think it's universally applicable as well.
Right, thanks. Hello.
I'll probably give a bit of a boring answer, let's put it that way. I'm an engineer at core, so I always put my systems thinking hat on when I even think about culture, because that's how my brain works, I guess, it's in boxes. So when I was building the culture, laying down the principles in one of the company that I work for, we started with a few hypotheses because we didn't really know what we want. That was the biggest thing, we really don't know what we want. We know what the final outcome should be, but we don't know what will get us there. Think about it like a product development. We want the conversion up by 5%, but we don't know what to do to get there. So you iterate, you have a hypothesis, you fail, and then you revert, and then you go back again. So I call the principles as the things that we strongly believe will have to be in place, and then the practices are extremely fluid. One of the practices, for example, is every decision had to be recorded and there has to be an ADR discussion. That was the stupidest decision I ever made. And then the metric we put it there to be, the decision cycle time, I'd really dearly hold it is if the decision takes more than half a day for you to move, something is really wrong. So our outcome is the decision cycle time has to come down to less than 2 days. And then a few practices really failed. So we had these ADR discussions. Now suddenly everyone's calendar is full of meetings with ADR discussions, and people were like, what the hell is happening? When do we actually work? We're just making decisions. And the decisions were not happening because we don't know where does the buck stop. So we have to iterate to understand where things have to click in. I think how you said, there is no one size fit all, right? What works for us has to be identified. And feedback loops, we all know feedback loops. We have to figure out how product works in production. We have to have a feedback loops about how is culture actually contextualizing in every room where you cannot be. That's the biggest challenge. You cannot be there in every room. There are 20 different conversations happening. How do you get those signals, skip level meetings, incident reviews, how many of them is product asked us to push it into production? Where is the ownership? How much of an accountability is happening? How much of a blaming is being put on to say? Most importantly, this is a really subtle thing. One of my engineering managers actually highlighted. When we have an all hands, and if people are not asking difficult questions, there is something really wrong. They just don't care. I think silence is the biggest indicator that you're missing something. The psychological safety is missing. Either they don't care or they're afraid to ask. Figure out which one it is. So I think these soft signals where you have to really, push yourselves to notice, they're there. You just have to see what you're looking for. I'm sure like big organizations, it's difficult to do the skip level meetings and all. Maybe do group level settings like I have a 80-member organization, skip levels didn't scale to me. I used to do a Friday breakfast, 10 people randomly discussing topics, and you just look for signals. What are they talking about? Are they helping? Are they happy? Are they talking about good things that happen at work? These things really help you adjust your hypothesis and change your processes accordingly. I wouldn't get answers, I would just know what's wrong. And then you go back and figure out what could work. It might not work again. What could work? Finally, you'll end up with something that will work until it breaks. And then you do it again. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous iteration process.
Yeah. And there's different types of disruptors, right? And I think it depends on the disruptor and how you face into that. We certainly, I've had teams where actually it's just around clarity. So you give that, and certainly when you inherit teams, you've got that. And sometimes actually if you create the roadmap and you're like, this is the clarity and this is what it means for you on the ground, because that's always what's really important, not just like, here's some cool vision outcome things we're trying to deliver. What does that mean for this engineer? Like, how does it roll up? There's that piece of work. And actually I couldn't get it to land in one team that I'd inherited, and everybody's NPS scores kept coming out and everybody else was just great. And I'm like, why isn't it? And I had tech services, so I had EUX, I had everybody, like engineers, the data, like the tech people. And I was like, this is not working. How am I going to change this? And I also had a few like real disruptors, and we knew who they were and we'd seen it in the feedback. And I was like, right, never one to shy away from a challenge. So I got them all in a room, because all I kept hearing was, we know what we're doing. We don't need you to tell us what to do, over and over again. And because I wasn't an architect or an engineer, they were like, you can't use the word spaghetti when you're talking about our systems. And I'm like, that's exactly what the chief architect said. So, but I got them in a room and I was like, okay, we're going to spend 2 hours downloading all the problems that you think that we've got, right? This is the empowerment of the team. And we spent the morning doing that. And then in groups, they voted for their biggest problems that they thought that they could solve. And then I got them in teams where I made sure I was quite careful about different teams. So I didn't put everyone on one table that were the disruptors. But I made sure that they were spread out and that I'd managed them. And with my senior leadership team, I put one on each table so that they could keep an eye on them / support them and really drive those conversations. And then at the end, they presented it back, each of the tables with each of the problems. And then I was like, okay, let's give a timeline. And I'd already managed to kind of squirrel some budget away, because also knew it was going to solve some problems and push my NPM to score up, so like, hey. And so we empowered them. And rather than the senior leader owning it, we gave one of the team leads, the champion, to be that problem solver. And then we had a monthly review where I was like, how are we doing on that? How are we doing on that? It wasn't the senior leader's responsibility, it was the champion, and the senior leader was supporting them. And that really changed it, because they suddenly felt like they were being heard, and they suddenly felt like they were actually solving the problems. And we changed a whole load of processes where the guys weren't doing it side of desk anymore. And I cleared stuff down, like things like, if there's 5,000 tickets on the service step backlog, just close them. Just close them, they'll raise another ticket. So how do we clear that down if you're spending all your time on that? So it's just things like, I'll give you permission to do that. If someone needs to raise another ticket, we'll just raise another ticket, it'll be fine, we'll pick it up. But if you're so worried about these 5,000, let's solve that problem and really quickly. But if you empower the teams and it comes back to that tool set, how do you, the clarity wasn't quite working, it was putting it back in their hands and empowering them. And that kind of shifted that. It didn't solve every problem, right? And it wasn't going to, but it certainly stopped that breaking at the bottom. The senior leadership were fine. It was the teams underneath, so. Great. On to and obviously women in tech, we're all here for it, we often end up as the culture carriers, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. Have you embraced that role, resisted it, or redefined it? Jo.
Yes.
Woohoo, Joe, go on.
Yes, I was thinking quite a lot about this question in particular, and I don't want to make any sweeping assumptions about, what women leaders are like or male leaders like or anything like that, because I think I've seen good and bad examples on both sides. So I don't want to just say that there's gender in the mix at all. But when I was thinking about kind of answering this question, one of the things that did strike to me, and this is, I suppose, when I'm looking at the leadership layer underneath me and my leadership team and how they manage their teams and the managers that they manage, I was thinking that there is a characteristic in women leaders or women managers, really, really good managers, where we tend to be more attuned to the cultural norms of the team. And we tend to have a greater depth of empathy for how teams are faring and what's happening within those teams. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think actually that's largely a strength. I think that's looking at what's happening within the teams and actually being able to empathize with it and identify it and then course correct and handle it. But the one thing I did want to call out is that I think it comes with an emotional tax. And I think it comes with a set of resilience, it requires a set of resilience that actually possibly isn't something that is shared in the same way. So for people that are highly empathetic and are kind of leaning into trying to really understand, we're all here talking about it, right? We're all here having engaged with what it means to kind of build and establish and nurture and course correct culture within organizations. We're already putting the time in here with our teams as well. I think that time and investment and energy comes with that natural level of tax. And I think that's one of the things that I see in my manager layer. And that's one of the things I'm very, very conscious of, particularly in times of transition. And there's a lot of transition that's happening, that I'm looking at them and I'm kind of looking for them and making sure that kind of like they are aware of that. We talk about it quite openly. We talk about how they're showing up and how they're able to respond to that and the resilience that's required to be a female in those spaces and to do that. And I'm not saying that there aren't male leaders that aren't incredibly empathetic and lead in the same way, but just as a pattern, I see that behavior slightly more prominent in female managers and female leaders.
Great, thanks. Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I have this discussion with my husband more than anyone, I guess. To Joe's point, like in evolutionary terms, I think women have this innate ability to see the unseen. Like think about it from as simple as a birthday party planning. Like you think about what sort of kids, how your daughter or son would gonna be feeling through the entire party. It's not just about the logistics, right? It's just not about feature dumping. It's not just about getting something into production. That is not the only thing we think about. I would call it like second level thinking. The first level thinking, like when we plan for a holiday, my husband thinks about flights and accommodation. That's about it. It ends there. I think about, okay, what sort of experience do we want as a family? What do we want it to do? Do we want it to be a leisure one? Do we want it to be a bit more fun? Do we want it to be adventurous? Like we think about the aspects that get everything together. I think I flaunt that ability of mine to say, like, how can I take that to the work? I never shy away from that because it's not a skill that everyone would have. So I definitely use it to my strength. However, I realized it happens everywhere, as in like this work goes unseen. That is the biggest problem I have. It's mostly because how we position our work. I don't want to position it like I want everyone to feel happy. I used to do that, like I want everyone to be happy. No, I'm actually containing the risk. Like I'm actually seeing a conflict before it could happen. So I interfered and the project is on track because of that interfering. So I didn't change my strength or I didn't shy away from it. I just changed the way I communicated the value that it gets in the way that everyone in the organization understands. Unfortunately, not everyone speaks the same language, so I just adapted the language to communicate the value of what I'm getting to the table. Probably women have to do it more because they are absolute superheroes in that. Like, probably men would take many centuries to get there. I'm not saying they can't, but women have to kill it, and they have to use it to their advantage to get things done. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling. Culture is not that. You are actually preventing a disaster to happen even before someone even could think about it. So that's how I think about it. I absolutely flaunt it.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for that. Lacey?
Well, I just think the point you just made is a really important one. That culture is not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's very frequently thought of that way, but it's absolutely a business results driver. Like, there's a Harvard study that says that companies that actually think about culture in a long-term, serious way grow at 4x the rate that companies that just try to focus on short-term behavior changes. So it's anytime you're in discussions in your company where people clearly do not value it as a real business element, it is. And when I think about the question of the role that women play in that, again, first it's reframing to say it's not a soft, fuzzy thing. So it is important that we play a role in it because it's part of the business. But I am very conscious of the fact that we are often culture carriers. So when I joined the UK senior leadership team 2.5, 3 years ago, it was far less diverse than it is now, I'll be honest, in my company. And in the core leadership team, which was a smaller subset of the overall leadership team, I was the only woman and I was the youngest. So I had like two dimensions of onlyism, if you will. And in that forum, I was therefore even more conscious of the fact that when we got to topics like culture or like diversity, I was the voice that was expected to be speaking up. And so I took a little bit of a different approach, and I consulted a couple of the men in the leadership team that I was quite close with and really trusted. And right before we had an SLT meeting, I would have conversations with them about different topics. I'd say, oh, I have a meeting coming up. Are you participating? Are you going? Or many of them are exec sponsors for other Kyndrl inclusion networks like Wellbeing or LGBTQIA+. And so I would say, you should bring that up in this meeting. Like, I think it's important enough to talk about in our core leadership team meeting. And so slowly I saw that if I planted the right seeds, and it wasn't people that weren't authentic about it, it's people who genuinely do care about culture or diversity or whatever the topic I raised was, but it probably wasn't in the forefront of their mind to surface in that meeting because they thought it was a business meeting and this was a soft amorphous thing. So in that way, I kind of challenged the role because I wanted it to be others in the SLT that were seen as visible and vocal around it. And in my team, I kind of do the same thing. So the team that I manage, we run at Kyndrl an annual engagement survey. So it's basically employee NPS. And each year when you get your results as a leader, you then create an action plan to try to improve them because we know, again, engaged teams perform better. So that process of developing an engagement plan is something that we co-create and we do together. And there's always a little volunteer committee that kind of galvanizes everybody, plans the sessions. And I had 5 people volunteer, 4 women, 1 man. And I really debated this for an embarrassing amount of time. I was like, by appointing the male the leader, am I saying the man has to lead all the women? Or am I saying that actually a man can take responsibility for something like culture and engagement? And I landed on the latter. I said, Tim, you lead it. And you be the vocal person when we talk about culture. And that might have been the wrong decision because of what I just mentioned, but there's no perfect answer to these things. So that's what I chose. I do think you have to decide on what feels authentic to you. Do you want to be the visible culture carrier? Do you want to kind of redefine it and challenge it? Or do you want to resist it entirely and be like, you know what? That doesn't feel authentic to me. I don't want to talk about culture. I don't want to engage in it. I'll participate, but I think you have to choose the modus operandi that feels authentic to you.
Yeah, great. I'm super conscious of time, and so that you guys can have another drink and network a little bit more. But before we wrap up, we did have some questions on the sign up, but while we're all in the room, does anyone have any questions for the panel? Off we go, Mike.
What a name.
Hey, thank you. So it's so encouraging to hear so many good examples of women leading successful teams and establishing good cultures and the successes that come from that. And I guess as a bit of an old hand, having been through these cycles, can the panel just share some of the resilience examples they've had to draw on to get to that place? Because in my experience, it's really never that easy. And one of the things that I always say when I'm talking to women who are coming up through the ranks is, my goodness me, we need resilience. And resilience doesn't have to be aggressive. There's loads of different ways you can use resilience. But I think it's really important to recognise that when you're taking on big transformation, big leadership, any kind of job, particularly if you're doing something that is challenging stereotypes, that actually resilience is something that really helps you pull through.
Great question. Anyone want to take this?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of very specific examples, and shame on me if I have made it seem too easy, because it's definitely not easy. To your point, it's really hard stuff, right? Especially to be a female in a male-dominated industry and to rise to a leadership level. I'm sure there's a book worth of stories in each of our cases. Two that stand out to me personally. One was actually interviewing for a role that I felt very qualified for. We never feel fully qualified for the roles we apply for. That's somewhat innate to some of us. But I applied to the role. I got the interview. I went through almost the entire interview. And at the very end of the interview, the person said to me, "Really great conversation. You're very impressive. It's like, really, the only concern I have is your number." And I heard him think about how he said this. He's like, "Your number of years of experience." He's like, "Oh, he's saying I'm young." Got it. And so I thought about this for a moment. I didn't want to respond the wrong way. It was on the phone, so you couldn't see me. I paused, thought about it. And I said, "I appreciate the feedback. Do bear in mind that the number of years of experience is the only thing in our whole conversation that I have no control over. So I will leave it to you to decide if I'm qualified for this role or not." And he gave me the job. But I mean, those are the types of things, if you let them, you're like, "Oh my God, he just told me I'm not experienced enough for this role." Like those little microaggressions that you're like, "That's the most nonsense thing I've ever heard. You just told me how impressive I was." Another example is a little bit later in my career. I won't say that. I was almost an executive at this point. I was told that the role I was doing, so I was asking for a promotion, because I have no problem asking for things. We all should be asking for things. I was asking for a promotion, and I was told that the role was the level above where I was, but I was not going to be getting the promotion. I said, "I just want to make sure I understand this. The job I am doing is here, but you're saying I'm here." I said, "In my mind, that means I'm either not the right person for the role, you need to take me out of the role, or you need to give me a really clear view of what I need to do to get here." And again, I looked side to side at my male peers in the same role. They were all here. So I think you do have to choose your battles, but you can't let things like that lay. So that wasn't the first time I asked for it, and it wasn't the last. You have to kind of, if you're down on the ground, stand up, brush yourself off, talk to women around you who are very supportive, talk to men around you who are very supportive, and find ways to kind of move past and grow from those little moments of failure. But those are two that really stand out to me, and that required a huge deal of resilience to say, I'm still going to get up every day and do this job like I'm this, even though they're literally telling me you are this.
Anything from anyone else?
Yeah, I think if we've made it look easy, I think that's a part of the ride. And I think resilience is it's certainly something that I try to kind of develop. It's not something that you can just do either. There is ways that you can learn to continue to show up. And it's like the little fish in Finding Nemo or whatever. It's like the just keep swimming thing. And I know that's a little bit, there's a good example, it's not work related. But I did go on holiday to Singapore, and I'm not a fan of heights. And in Singapore, there's this nice rainforest treetop walk. And I can't remember how long the loop is, but there's only one way round, and the treetop walk is halfway through the loop. So you can either, well, maybe it's towards the end of the loop, you can either go all the way back the way you went, or you have to walk across it. And I just couldn't do this. I did it with my eyes shut. I is just keep swimming, all the way across, not looking at anything, not looking down. And sometimes it's like that within the work environment. And to be fair, I think in a lot of cases, you get points for showing up and you get points for continuing to show up. And that's definitely a trait that I try to establish in the leaders that I'm kind of developing as well, because it is really, really hard. Sometimes you have to go into the toilets and have a cry and then brush yourself off and come out. But I think part of that is also sharing that experience, right?
Yeah.
And it's also acknowledging that that's a part of the path. Like part of there have been a couple of challenging incidents, even in the last kind of few months. And one of the hardest things that my boss said to me is, you're doing a fantastic job because you've just made something that is incredibly difficult look incredibly easy, right? And there's something there that, like, you know, actually there is legwork, there is resilience that takes to kind of actually be in that space. But yeah, I think it's something that it's treading the boards. You can't learn it, you can't take a course on it, but you just have to experience it. But yeah, I think the main thing is just being really honest about it and sharing those experiences so other people recognise that too.
Anything from you, Mum? Well,
Mine is, I think it could be a cultural thing, it could be a me thing, it could be a she thing. I don't know what it is. I always struggled over the last few years, if I'm being direct and blunt about particular things that are happening. I have had people come to me maybe 10 years ago, come to me and it's like, why can't you just behave like a woman? This was said on my face. And there were cases where people she shoots from the hip. And when you take that feedback, there is this book I did recently, I think How Women Rise. That's a beautiful book if no one has read. It says we internalize the feedback pretty much and we take it to the personal level and and we go into this spiral of, oh, I'm probably not good enough. I'm probably aiming too high. I don't have it in me. I really struggle to go through that phase and not lose my authentic self. I'm generally a bit more straight to the point, give it the point, etc. And when I got a feedback that she shoots from the hip, I'm like, oh, now what should I be? Should I soften my message? And if I soften my message, I'm not effective enough. And that's not true me as well. So I think my resilience is more how do I take the feedback and contextualize it to me without losing myself? I think that was the biggest struggle. I probably still go through it. It's it's not just in the office setup, in multiple setups it's the same. You're too direct or you're too soft. You're probably not challenging enough, you're challenging enough. So how do I get the feedback that can help me action myself? Even when defining the principles and stuff, when we're oh, this doesn't seem right to me. And people are like, how can you just say that? I'm like, so I struggle to myself to say, how do I navigate this expression of my views in a way that people can understand and not losing myself in it? I think I would call that biggest struggle for myself. And I fall down, I pick it up, I learn. Probably at some point I will get to a point where I know what I am and what I should talk and what I shouldn't. And when I shouldn't care about the feedback. I think feedback is good, but sometimes you have to learn to ignore it because you know yourselves too much. So I would say that to everyone and probably to my daughter 100 times a day as well.
One of my favorite quotes is, don't accept criticism from someone you wouldn't seek advice from. And that's the only reason those two examples I just gave, I kind of let them roll because I was like, well, it's okay coming from that person. It's okay. So I totally agree with that.
It's difficult to navigate that, especially being women, and I wouldn't put it on anyone. It's probably unconscious behavior as well. Probably they don't know that they're doing it. But being in the women wanting to go into the next step, you really have to find a way to navigate that.
great. Thank you very much. I'm just highly competitive. So I think we're getting the cut sign. So I'd love to ask you if you had any more questions, but obviously come and find us afterwards if you want to come and talk to us. We're happy to chat. I would do a roundup. I'm getting the sign. So thank you so much for listening to us. I'd like to thank the panel, Jo, Lacey and Mano.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Thank you for being here.